The corner store on Fifth Avenue used to stay open until midnight. Now it closes at 6, right when the sun starts to set. The owner, an older man who'd run that shop for 20 years, keeps his metal shutters locked tight these days. He's not taking chances anymore. This is what life looks like in Riverside now. It's a neighborhood that used to be full of kids playing in the streets, families sitting on porches, music floating from open windows on summer nights. But that was a long time ago. These days, people walk fast with their heads down. They don't make eye contact. They definitely don't stay out after dark. Two groups run everything here. On the east side, you've got the Red Vipers. They wear their colors proud, marking their territory with spray paint and intimidation. Move west past Hamilton Street and you're in North Side Crew territory. Different colors, same tactics. Both sides have young men on corners watching everything that moves. Both sides demand money from businesses for protection. Both sides have guns and they're not afraid to use them. The sound of gunshots used to make people call the police. Now it just makes them close their windows and turn up the television. You learn to tell the difference between fireworks and bullets pretty quick when you live here. Fireworks echo and crackle. Bullets have a sharper crack, followed by silence that feels heavier than it should. Nobody crosses from one territory to another unless they absolutely have to. The invisible line down the middle of Riverside might as well be a brick wall. Families on the east side haven't visited relatives on the west side in years. Kids can't go to the park 3 blocks away because it's in the wrong territory. This is just how things are now. This is normal. But there's something strange that happens in this neighborhood. Something that doesn't make any sense when you first see it. There's this woman, probably in her early 60s, who walks through both territories like the invisible lines don't exist. Her name is Elena, and she runs a small community center right in the middle of everything, in what people call the neutral zone. The building itself is nothing special. It's old, with cracked paint and windows that probably should have been replaced 10 years ago. There's a small sign out front that says Riverside Community Center in faded letters. Inside, there's a room with old couches where kids can do homework. A kitchen that serves free meals twice a week and not much else. It's the kind of place that should have been shut down or taken over a long time ago. But nobody touches it. Nobody touches Elena. You can see it happen if you watch closely enough. A group of Red Vipers will be standing on a corner, music blasting from someone's car, everyone tense and ready for trouble. Then Elena will walk past carrying her canvas grocery bag, moving at her own steady pace. And something shifts. The guys go quiet. They step back, creating space for her to pass. Their eyes drop to the ground like they're children who've been caught doing something wrong. She doesn't say a word to them. Doesn't even look their way. Just keeps walking. The same thing happens on the west side with the north side crew. Doesn't matter if they're in the middle of a deal. Doesn't matter if they're angry about something. When Elena appears, they stop, they move. They let her pass without a single word. At first, newcomers to the neighborhood think maybe she's paying both sides. Maybe she's got some kind of deal worked out. But that's not it. People who've been here longer know it's something different, something deeper. They just don't talk about it. In Riverside, you learn quick that some questions are better left unasked. There was this moment a few months back that really showed how different things are with Elena. A guy who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades was walking home from work one evening, and he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The Red Vipers and Northside crew had run into each other right at the border between territories. Both groups were armed. Both groups were angry about something, and the tension was so thick you could feel it from half a block away. This was the kind of situation that usually ended with someone getting hurt. The smart thing to do was turn around, find another way home, maybe wait it out in a shop somewhere. But before anyone could move, before the first threat could be shouted, Elena appeared. She was just coming back from the grocery store carrying that same canvas bag she always had. It looked heavy, probably full of vegetables and rice for the community center kitchen. She walked right into the middle of the standoff. Not around it, not quickly past it, right through the center of it, and both groups went silent. Not a word, not a gesture. They stepped back, creating a path for her like water parting around a stone. Some of the younger guys looked uncomfortable, shifting on their feet. A few of the older ones had expressions that were hard to read. Respect maybe, or fear, or something else entirely. Elena didn't acknowledge any of them. She just walked through, her pace never changing, her face calm. When she was past, when she'd turned the corner and disappeared from view, the standoff broke up. Both groups just walked away in different directions. No shots fired. No one hurt. Whatever they'd been about to do, they didn't do it. The man who saw it all stood there for a long time afterward, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. In a neighborhood where violence was as common as rainfall, where both gangs would start shooting over the smallest sign of disrespect, this woman could walk through the middle of everything and make armed men back down with nothing but her presence. That's the thing about Elena that nobody can quite explain. She doesn't carry a weapon. She doesn't make threats. She doesn't have bodyguards or connections to anyone powerful. She's just a woman in her 60s who runs a struggling community center in the most dangerous part of town. But somehow she's untouchable. The gangs that control everything, that make everyone else in Riverside live in fear, are afraid of her. Or maybe not afraid. Maybe it's something else. Whatever it is, it's powerful enough to stop bullets that haven't been fired yet. Powerful enough to create peace in a place where peace shouldn't exist and nobody knows why. 25 years ago, Elena was a completely different person. She didn't live in Riverside back then. She had a house in the suburbs, the kind with a nice lawn and neighbors who brought over cookies at Christmas. She drove a reliable car and had a career that most people would be proud of. She was a trauma surgeon, and not just any surgeon. She was one of the best in the state. County General Hospital was where she worked. And if you came in with a gunshot wound, a car accident, or any other life-threatening emergency, you wanted Elena in that operating room. She had steady hands and a calm mind, even when everything around her was chaos. Other doctors would get nervous, would second-guess themselves, but not Elena. She'd seen too much to panic. She'd saved too many lives to doubt herself. The emergency room at County General saw everything. This was the hospital that served all of Riverside and the surrounding areas. Gang violence was already starting back then. Not as bad as it is now, but bad enough. Elena would work 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. She'd operate on 3, 4, sometimes 5 patients in a single night. Gunshot wounds mostly. Stab wounds. Kids who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She never asked questions about who they were or how they'd gotten hurt. That wasn't her job. Her job was to save lives, and she was good at it. Really good. There were cases where other doctors would shake their heads, would say there was nothing they could do. But Elena would try anyway. And more often than not, she'd win. The young men who came through her operating room, the ones involved in the early gang activity, they remembered her. Even when they were unconscious, even when they were barely clinging to life, something about her stayed with them. Maybe it was her voice, always calm and reassuring. Maybe it was the way she'd talk to their mothers in the waiting room, explaining everything honestly but with kindness. Whatever it was, she made an impression. But being a surgeon like Elena meant sacrifice. It meant missing family dinners and school plays. It meant being exhausted all the time. It meant that your own life came second to everyone else's emergencies. Elena had a son, a bright kid who understood why his mom was never home, who never complained when she missed his basketball games or parent-teacher conferences. His name was David, and he was her whole world. David was 17 when everything changed. It was a March night, unseasonably warm, the kind of weather that brings people out onto the streets. He'd been walking home from a friend's house, taking a shortcut through what would later become the border between gang territories. Back then, it was just a regular street in a neighborhood that was starting to have problems. There was a dispute that night. Something stupid. The kind of thing that shouldn't matter but somehow does when you're young and angry. 2 groups of guys, barely more than teenagers themselves, facing off over something nobody can even remember now. Someone pulled a gun, then someone else pulled a gun. And David, who had nothing to do with any of it, was caught in the middle. The call came into County General at 9:47 p.m. Multiple gunshot victims. Elena was already in the middle of surgery on someone else when she heard the commotion in the emergency room. She heard shouting, crying, someone screaming a name. Then she heard what the name was, and her whole world stopped. They brought David straight into her operating room. The other doctors tried to stop her, tried to tell her she couldn't operate on her own son, that it wasn't allowed, that she was too emotionally involved. But Elena pushed past them. These were her hands that had saved hundreds of lives. These were her hands that would save her son. She operated for 9 hours straight. 9 hours of fighting against injuries that were too severe, damage that was too extensive. Her hands, always so steady, started to shake for the first time in her career. But she kept going. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't give up. At 2:47 in the morning, David's heart stopped for the last time. Elena tried everything. She tried things that weren't in any medical textbook, things born from desperation and a mother's love. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes skill isn't enough. Sometimes people die and there's nothing anyone can do about it. The other doctors expected Elena to leave Riverside after that, to sell her house, move away, start over somewhere new. That's what most people would do. That's what made sense. But Elena didn't do what made sense. 3 months after David's death, she quit her job at County General. She sold her suburban house with the nice lawn, and she moved into Riverside, right into the heart of the neighborhood where her son had died. She bought the building where David had been shot. It was abandoned at the time, full of broken glass and graffiti. People thought she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Grief does strange things to people, but Elena had a plan, even if nobody else understood it. She spent her savings fixing up that building, not making it fancy, just making it functional. She turned it into a community center, a place where kids could go after school, where families could get a hot meal, where maybe, just maybe, some teenager would choose to be there instead of out on the streets. But here's the thing that most people don't know. Before she left County General, Elena did something unusual. She went through years of medical records. She made a list of every gang member she'd ever operated on, every life she'd saved during her years in that emergency room. The list was long, 47 names. Some of them had been children when she'd saved them. Some had been teenagers. All of them were alive because of her. She wrote down their names, their injuries, the dates of their surgeries. She wrote down everything she could remember about them. Who visited them in the hospital. What they'd said when they woke up. She kept detailed notes the way only a surgeon would, and she made sure that every single one of them knew what she'd done, not as a threat, not as leverage, just as a fact. You are alive because of me. I gave you a second chance at life. This is what you chose to do with it. Some of those 47 names became important people in the gangs that now run Riverside. Some of them are leaders. Some are the ones who make decisions about who lives and who dies. And every single one of them remembers the woman who saved their life when nobody else could. That's why Elena can walk through gang territory untouched. Not because she's threatening. Not because she has power or connections. But because half the dangerous men in Riverside owe her a debt that can never be repaid. She gave them life itself. And in the streets, that kind of debt is sacred. Detective Rodriguez had been working gang cases in Riverside for 3 years when she stumbled onto something that didn't make sense. She'd seen a lot in those 3 years. Seen the violence, the fear, the way these gangs operated. She thought she understood how power worked on these streets. But then she found the photograph. It was during a raid on a Red Viper's safe house. The kind of operation that takes months of planning and dozens of officers. They hit the place at dawn, breaking down doors, securing rooms, gathering evidence. Rodriguez was searching a bedroom that belonged to one of the gang's enforcers. A guy named Julio who had a reputation for being brutal. Cold. The kind of person who didn't seem to care about anything or anyone. Behind a cracked mirror in his room, tucked into the frame, was a photograph. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it wasn't displayed either. It was protected. The photo showed Elena, probably from about 15 years ago, wearing surgical scrubs and standing in what looked like a hospital hallway. Someone had taken care of this picture. It was the only thing in that whole room that wasn't covered in dust or damaged. When they brought Julio in for questioning, Rodriguez couldn't help herself. She pulled out the photograph and placed it on the table between them. Julio had been stone-faced up until that moment. Hadn't said a word, hadn't shown any emotion. But when he saw that photo, something changed. His eyes went wide. His hands started shaking. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Found it in your room," Rodriguez said. "Want to tell me who she is?" Julio looked at the photo for a long time. Then he did something Rodriguez had never seen a gang member do during an interrogation. He started crying. Not just tears, but actual sobbing. This man who'd been arrested for assault, who had a record as long as her arm, was breaking down over a photograph. "That's Dr. Vasquez," he finally said. "She saved my life when I was 16. I got shot in the chest during a stupid fight. The bullet was right next to my heart. The other doctors at County General said I probably wouldn't make it. But she operated on me for 7 hours straight. 7 hours. My mother told me later that Dr. Vasquez stayed by my bed for 2 days after the surgery, checking on me every hour. She said it was a miracle I survived. Rodriguez had been a detective long enough to know when someone was telling the truth. Julio wasn't making this up. The emotion was too real, too raw, but it still didn't make sense. Why would this hardened criminal keep a photo of a surgeon from years ago? She's the reason I'm alive, Julio said quietly. Everything I've done since that day, good or bad, I only got to do because she gave me another chance. I know I messed it up. I know I didn't use that second chance the way she probably hoped. But I never forgot what she did for me. After that interview, Rodriguez couldn't let it go. She started digging deeper, cross-referencing old hospital records with known gang members. What she found was staggering. Elena hadn't just saved Julio. She'd saved dozens of them, 47 documented cases over her years at County General. And those were just the ones she could confirm. The current leader of the North Side crew, a man everyone called Reaper because of how many people he'd supposedly killed, had been saved by Elena twice. Once when he was 19 and got stabbed in a dispute. Then again 2 years later when he was shot 3 times in a drive-by. Both times Elena was the surgeon who'd kept him alive. The Red Viper's leader, a guy named Vincent who went by Ghost, had an even more personal connection. He'd been 11 years old when a car hit him, crushing his leg so badly that other doctors wanted to amputate. Elena had spent 14 hours reconstructing the bone and tissue, saving the leg. But it wasn't just the surgery. Vincent's family couldn't be located that night. He was alone and terrified in the hospital. Elena had stayed with him, holding his hand, talking to him until he fell asleep. She'd visited him every day during his recovery, bringing him books and homework from his school. Rodriguez found case after case like this. Young men who'd come into County General broken and bleeding, and Elena had put them back together. She'd saved the second-in-command of the Northside crew when he was 15. She'd saved 3 of the Red Viper's top enforcers. She'd saved the cousins, brothers, and friends of dozens more gang members. But here was the really interesting part. Elena had kept records of all of it. Detailed records. Not just medical files, but personal notes. She knew which gang member's mother had diabetes. She knew who had a younger sister in college. She knew who'd promised her they'd turn their life around and who'd been honest about probably not changing. Rodriguez managed to get a look at Elena's personal journal through a warrant related to another case. What she read there surprised her. Elena wasn't naive about who these men had become. She knew exactly what they were doing. She knew about the violence, the drugs, the fear they spread. She didn't approve of it, but she also didn't regret saving their lives. There was one entry that Rodriguez remembered word for word. I took an oath to save lives, not to judge who deserved saving. Julio came into my emergency room dying. I made him live. What he does with that life is his choice, not mine. But he knows, and I made sure he'll never forget, that he only gets to make that choice because I gave him the chance. That was Elena's power. Not violence, not money, not threats. Just the undeniable fact that she'd given these men something nobody else could give back. She'd given them their lives, and she'd made absolutely certain they all knew it. Rodriguez started noticing things after that. The way gang members would suddenly stop their cars to let Elena cross the street. The way they'd go quiet when she walked by. One time she saw a young Red Viper's member, couldn't have been more than 18, carrying Elena's groceries for her. He didn't look happy about it, but he did it anyway. When Rodriguez asked him why, he said his older brother owed her a debt, and that debt extended to the whole family. The gangs in Riverside operated on a code. Respect had to be earned, loyalty had to be proven, and debts had to be paid. Elena had earned more respect and created more loyalty than any gang leader could. Through fear alone, she'd saved the lives of the most dangerous men in the neighborhood, and in doing so, she'd made herself untouchable. But it went deeper than just the men she'd saved. Those 47 people had families. They had friends. They had people who loved them and would have lost them if not for Elena. When you added it all up, when you counted every mother who still had a son, every child who still had a father, every friend who didn't have to attend a funeral, the number of people who owed Elena something was in the hundreds. That's why she could walk through gang territory without fear. That's why her community center stayed open when everything else got shut down or taken over. Not because of threats or deals or protection money, but because an entire neighborhood knew that she'd given them back the people they loved, and they would do anything to protect her in return. Detective Rodriguez closed her investigation into Elena after that. There was nothing to investigate. The woman was just living in the neighborhood, running her community center trying to help people. The fact that she had the most dangerous men in Riverside treating her like royalty was just a side effect of being exceptionally good at her job years ago, but Rodriguez kept thinking about something. Julio had said during that interview, "She gave me a second chance at life and I wasted it. That's on me, but I'll spend the rest of that life making sure nothing bad happens to her. It's the least I can do." Everything was about to change and nobody saw it coming. For years, Riverside had been split between two gangs. It was terrible, but it was stable in its own twisted way. People knew the rules. They knew which streets to avoid, which colors not to wear, how to stay safe, but stability never lasts forever. The Eastside Disciples showed up in late summer. They came from across the state, moving into cities where they saw opportunity, and Riverside looked like opportunity to them. Two gangs fighting each other, police stretched thin, a neighborhood where people were too scared to stand up for themselves. Perfect conditions for a takeover. Their leader was a man who called himself Razor. Nobody knew his real name and nobody wanted to find out. He had a reputation that traveled ahead of him. The Eastside Disciples didn't just control territory, they destroyed it. They didn't care about the community or the people living there. They wanted money and power, and they'd burn everything down to get it. Razor looked at the map of Riverside and saw something interesting. Right in the middle between the two gang territories was a neutral zone, and right in the center of that zone was an old building that would make a perfect headquarters, the Riverside Community Center. He sent some of his guys to check it out first. They came back with a report. The building was run by an older woman. Nobody important, nobody dangerous. No security, no weapons, nothing. Easy target. So Razor went himself to deliver the message. He walked into the community center on a Tuesday afternoon. There were some kids inside doing homework, a few mothers in the kitchen preparing food for the evening meal, and there was Elena sitting at a desk in the corner going through some papers. Razor wasn't used to subtle approaches. He walked right up to Elena and told her how things were going to be. The Eastside Disciples were taking over Riverside. This building was going to be their headquarters. She had 1 week to clear out, take her little charity operation somewhere else. If she was still here after 7 days, the building would be burned down. With her inside it, if necessary. The kids in the room had gone quiet. The mothers in the kitchen had stopped cooking. Everyone was frozen, waiting to see what would happen. They all knew who Elena was, what she meant to the neighborhood. But they also knew what kind of man was standing in front of her. Elena looked up from her papers. She studied Razor for a moment, her expression calm. Then she said something that nobody expected. No, just that one word. No explanation. No fear in her voice. Just a simple refusal. Razor laughed. He actually thought it was funny. This old woman sitting in her rundown community center, saying no to him. He leaned down close to her face and repeated his threat, slower this time, making sure she understood. 1 week, then fire. Elena still didn't look scared. "I heard you the first time," she said. "My answer is still no. This building stays open. These people need it. He'll have to find somewhere else." Razor left after that, but everyone knew he'd meant what he said. The Eastside Disciples didn't make empty threats. In exactly 7 days, they'd come back with gasoline and matches. And Elena, stubborn as she was, wouldn't leave. Word spread fast through Riverside. People were talking about it in hushed voices on street corners, in shops, in their homes. That crazy woman at the community center had basically signed her own death warrant. Someone needed to do something. But what could anyone do against the Eastside Disciples? 2 people heard the news and had the same reaction, even though they were enemies who hadn't spoken in years. Reaper, the leader of the Northside crew, and Ghost, the leader of the Red Vipers, both realized that Elena was in real danger. And both of them knew exactly what they owed her. Reaper showed up at the community center 3 days before Razor's deadline. He came alone, which was unusual for someone in his position. Elena was sweeping the front steps when he arrived. "I heard what happened," he said. "I'm here to offer protection. My crew will guard this building. The Eastside Disciples won't touch you." Elena stopped sweeping and looked at him. "And how many people will die in the fight that follows?" Reaper didn't answer. They both knew the number would be high. "I don't want your violence," Elena said. "I never wanted it. That's not why I saved your life." "Then what do you want?" Reaper asked, frustrated. "You can't just let them burn this place down." Elena leaned on her broom, thinking. Then she said something that shocked him. I want you to talk to the young ones in your crew, the teenagers, the new recruits. I want you to tell them the truth. Show them your scars. Tell them about the nightmares you still have. Tell them what this life really costs. And stop bringing in new kids. Let the young ones stay young. Reaper stared at her. You're asking me to weaken my own organization. I'm asking you to save lives instead of destroying them, Elena said. You owe me 2 lives. Your own twice over. This is how you pay that debt. The next day, Ghost from the Red Vipers came with the same offer of protection. Elena gave him the same answer, made the same request. He argued with her, told her it was impossible that his crew wouldn't listen. But Elena pulled out a notebook from her pocket. The notebook with all those names, all those records she'd kept. She started reading out loud. Not just the gang members she'd saved, but their family members. Ghost's younger brother, saved when he was 12 after a bad accident. His cousin, his best friend from childhood. His nephew who'd been born premature and survived because Elena had fought to keep the hospital staff working on him for hours. Your entire organization exists because I kept these people alive, Elena said. You can repay that debt however you want. With violence, if that's all you know. Or with change. Your choice. Both gang leaders left without making promises. But they were thinking. For the first time in years, they were actually thinking about something other than territory and revenge and power. 2 days before Razor's deadline, something unprecedented happened. Reaper and Ghost met face to face. Not in the middle of the street with weapons drawn, but in a quiet spot near the river away from everyone else. 2 men who'd been enemies for over a decade, sitting down to talk about one woman who'd saved both their lives. They compared notes and realized they'd both gotten the same request. They talked about the kids in their organizations, some barely 15 years old, already carrying guns and making enemies. They talked about the funerals they'd attended, the friends they'd lost, the mothers crying over sons who'd died too young. She's asking us to destroy ourselves from the inside, Ghost said. Maybe, Reaper replied. Or maybe she's asking us to remember that we're supposed to be human. They talked for 3 hours that night, and by the end of it they'd made a decision. Not an alliance exactly. They were still rivals, still on opposite sides. But for Elena, for the woman who'd given them both a second chance at life, they could at least try something different. The real question was whether different would be enough. The Eastside Disciples were coming in 2 days, and Razor had never failed to follow through on a threat before. Everyone in Riverside was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen, waiting to see if the woman who could stop bullets without firing a gun could survive against someone who didn't know about her power, because that was the thing about Elena's protection. It only worked on people who knew what she'd done, who understood the debt they owed. Razor and his Eastside Disciples were strangers. They didn't owe her anything. They didn't care about her past or her sacrifices. For the first time in years, Elena's life was truly in danger, and everyone who loved her was scrambling to figure out how to save the woman who'd saved so many of them. The night Razor and his crew came to burn down the community center, they brought enough gasoline to level the entire block. It was exactly 7 days after his warning, right at midnight. They came in 5 cars, at least 20 men, all armed and ready for whatever resistance they might face. But when they turned onto the street where the community center stood, they had to stop. The road was completely blocked. Not by police cars or barricades, by people. Dozens and dozens of people just standing there in the darkness, forming a human wall around the building. Razor got out of his car, angry and confused. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd thought maybe a few gang members might show up, that there'd be a fight. But this was something else entirely. These weren't just gang members. There were old women standing next to young men with Red Vipers tattoos. There were families with small children. There were people in business clothes who'd clearly come straight from work. There were teenagers and grandparents and everyone in between. What is this? Razor demanded, walking toward the crowd. Nobody answered at first. Then Reaper stepped forward from the group. Ghost appeared from the other side. 2 gang leaders who should have been enemies standing together. This is everyone she saved, Reaper said simply. Everyone she saved. Razor looked around at the massive crowd. What are you talking about? Ghost spoke up. That woman in there, Elena, she used to be a surgeon. She saved my life when I was 11 years old. Saved his life twice, he nodded toward Reaper. Saved the lives of at least 47 gang members in this neighborhood. But it's not just us. It's our families, our friends. My mother is here because Elena saved her son. His cousin is here because Elena saved his brother. I don't care about any of that, Razor said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. He'd never seen anything like this before. I gave her a warning. She didn't listen. Now there are consequences. Then you'll have to go through all of us first, said a woman's voice from the crowd. It was someone's mother, maybe in her 50s, wearing a church dress. Dr. Vasquez saved my son 15 years ago. He was shot in a robbery. The other doctors said he wouldn't make it. She operated on him for 8 hours. My boy lived. He's standing right next to me now. You want to hurt her, you'll have to hurt me first. Other voices joined in. A man in his 30s stepped forward. She saved my little brother when he got hit by a car. He was 7 years old. The doctors wanted to give up, but she didn't. He just graduated from college last month. An older gang member, someone with gray in his hair and scars on his face, spoke up. She saved my life when I was 19. I know I didn't use that second chance well. I made bad choices, but my daughter didn't. My daughter is studying to be a nurse because of Dr. Vasquez, because she saw what one person with skill and compassion could do. Story after story came from the crowd. Not everyone had been saved by Elena directly, but everyone knew someone who had been. Everyone had a connection to her, a reason to be standing there in the middle of the night putting themselves between her and danger. Razor looked at his crew. They were tough men, used to violence, used to getting their way through fear and intimidation, but even they seemed uncertain. This wasn't a gang fight. This wasn't even a fight at all. How do you fight against gratitude? How do you threaten people who've already decided your threats don't matter? There's got to be at least 100 people here, one of Razor's men said quietly. And more coming. I can see cars pulling up down the street. He was right. As word had spread through the evening, more people kept showing up. Former patients of Elena's, their families, people who'd eaten meals at the community center when they had nowhere else to go, kids she'd tutored, mothers she'd helped. The crowd was growing, not shrinking. Razor had a choice to make. He could try to follow through on his threat, but that would mean violence on a scale he hadn't planned for. It would mean attacking families, mothers, children, and even if he succeeded, even if he somehow got through this crowd and burned the building down, what would he have gained? Every person here would become his enemy. Every gang member in Riverside would come after him. His organization wouldn't be taking over the neighborhood. They'd be starting a war they couldn't win, or he could walk away. Admit defeat. Find another location, another strategy. It would make him look weak, but at least his crew would survive. He stood there for a long moment, calculating, thinking. Then Elena herself emerged from the community center. The crowd parted to let her through, and she walked right up to Razor with that same calm expression she always had. You're making a mistake, she said quietly, so only he could hear. Not tonight. The mistake you made was thinking that power only comes from fear. These people aren't here because they're afraid of you or afraid of me. They're here because they choose to be. That's real power. That's the kind of power that lasts. Razor looked at her, then at the crowd, then back at her. You think you've won, he said. I think you have a choice, Elena replied. You can try to take what you want by force and lose everything. Or you can find another way. There are plenty of empty buildings in this city, but there's only one community center where people feel safe. Let them keep it. It took him another minute, but finally Razor made the signal. His crew got back in their cars. They drove away slowly, having to navigate around all the people still standing in the street. The East Side disciples never came back to Riverside. Within a few weeks, they'd moved on to another city, looking for easier targets. That night became legendary in the neighborhood. People talked about it for years afterward. The night an entire community stood together to protect one woman. The night that gang members from rival organizations put aside their differences for someone they all owed. But something else happened after that night, something that took longer to notice. Reaper kept his promise to Elena. He started talking to the younger members of his crew, showing them his scars, telling them the truth about the life they were choosing. Some of them listened. Some of them left the gang life behind. Ghost did the same with the Red Vipers. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't instant. But slowly, gradually, the recruitment of teenagers stopped. The gangs got smaller. The violence decreased, not completely. The problems that had created these gangs in the first place still existed. Poverty, lack of opportunity, broken systems. Those don't disappear overnight. But the neighborhood changed. The corner store on 5th Avenue started staying open until 8 o'clock, then 9, then finally back to its old midnight closing time. Families started sitting on their porches again in the evening. Kids played in the streets. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, still violence, still fear. But it was better. Noticeably better. And at the center of it all was still Elena, running her community center, cooking meals, helping with homework, being exactly who she'd always been. She never asked for recognition, never talked about what had happened that night. When people thanked her, she'd just smile and say she was doing what anyone would do. But she wasn't doing what anyone would do. She was doing what only she could do. She'd taken her grief over losing her son and transformed it into purpose. She'd taken her skills as a surgeon and applied them to healing a community instead of just individuals. She'd saved lives with her hands in an operating room, and then she'd saved a neighborhood with her presence, her stubborn refusal to give up, and her belief that people were worth fighting for. 10 years later, there's a new generation growing up in Riverside who don't remember how bad things used to be. They just know that the quiet woman who runs the community center is someone special, someone protected. They don't always know why, though the older kids tell stories. The gangs still exist. Reaper and Ghost are still running their organizations, still technically enemies, but they're different now. Smaller, more careful, and both of them have an understanding that goes unspoken. Some things are sacred. Some people are off limits. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but you honor them anyway. Elena walks through Riverside just like she always has, with her canvas grocery bag at her own steady pace. She's older now, moving a little slower but still going, still showing up. Still believing that one person can make a difference because she proved it, not with violence or money or threats, but with skill and compassion and the simple act of saving lives when she had the chance, then refusing to let those lives be wasted without at least trying to show them a better way. That's the story of the woman everyone feared the gangs for. Except she never wanted fear. She wanted change, and somehow impossibly she got it.